Hello everyone, I'm Ming Contreras, and welcome back to another episode of Ben Talks About. And as you can no doubt see from my background here, I'm going to be taking my second look at one of the NECA series of Godzilla figures, and I guess it would be sort of appropriate that the next one that we do is actually the very first Godzilla from the original 1954 movie. And once again, this is a part of the line of Godzilla figures that are far more articulated than the original figures produced by Bandai. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get right into it and start off with the overall detail of the figure. And overall, I do have to say that this one is actually looks really good. This version of Godzilla, it feels like it's like the proportions are much more larger, especially compared to the previous one that I reviewed, but talked about. The proportions are way bigger, and you're able to see a lot more of the sort of detail, especially with this more grayscale styled color scheme. This was never really necessarily my favorite Godzilla redesign, mostly because I don't really go back to watch the original movie. There are just other films in the series that I'd much prefer to go back to over and over. But still, you have the overall, that sort of classic Godzilla design with this version. And one thing about this version of this particular figure compared to, say, other Godzilla figures or versions of the 1954 Godzilla is that this one, if you actually look at certain areas, you can actually notice actual like wrinkles in his like skin. I'm not quite sure if you're able to zoom in on that, but especially if you look at just this overall area right here, there are many areas that seem like very wrinkled, and I think that's supposed to give like the illusion that this is actually not necessarily a realistic version of it, but rather a figure of like the person in the actual like suit that they would use for the movie. Which I think is actually kind of cool, because a lot of other times you look at other Godzilla figures and they always try to make it seem, make it as if it was like an actual creature, rather than doing this sort of like look to it. And I think doing that gives it a bit more charm, I guess you could say, compared to other figures. So overall, I think the detail is really nice, and it has a sort of charming look to it. So like the previous figure I talked about, the articulation is a lot better compared to the other ones. And one thing that this figure actually has going for it compared to the previous one I reviewed is that the head is actually has way more movement to it. It's way more like actually like mobile, so that you can actually get him staring in like multiple different directions. I think mostly because this part, the actual neck part here that's connecting the head to the rest of the body, is an actual like plastic piece that connects the two together, so that gives it an extra range of movement. Unfortunately, he's not able to actually like stare as far up as I would probably want it to, but it is able to stare. It is able to go down that far. And one of the things that I'm not quite sure if I talked about this in my previous video, but a lot of the joints, especially when you first take it out of the box. By the way, I didn't really bother keeping the boxes, just the same generic casing that the other figure I reviewed came in. But when you take it out of the box, the joints can be sort of a little bit stiff at first. One of the most noticeable areas that are still a bit on the stiff side are definitely the legs, because as you can see right here, there's actually it's actually like a joint that's supposed to connect it to like the knee, but as you can see, it takes quite a while for it to actually get that far. And even then, when you try to get him standing while he's bending his knees, it makes it so that his feet are like very close to like touching each other, and that doesn't necessarily look all too right. So usually I just keep him so that he's able to like stand like flat on his feet. One of the things that sort of hinders it is the fact that because of that, and because of the fact that the tail is basically stuck in this sort of like position here. I mean, you are able to like tilt it very slightly, in different directions, and like the previous figure, the very tip of the tail is on like a, so this is a more rubberized kind of piece, so that it's able to like stay in a certain position like that. But the way that it's positioned like this, you aren't necessarily able to make him so that he actually has his back straight. He's basically sort of like, he's like stuck in this sort of like bent over sort of angle, which, you know, that doesn't necessarily bother me compared to as much as I thought it would, but I mean, you are able to make it so that he is still like staring far. He's like still staring like straight to the side, but especially when you go back and watch the movie, he never as far as I remember, he didn't really, his body wasn't really that hunched over. But yeah, his waist is able to is on a separate piece as well, but it doesn't seem like the figure really wants you to like twist it that sort of way. And one of the things about it is one thing that I actually like about it is that when you get like the other figure that I reviewed, his mouth can open up as well. And one thing that I actually really liked about that is the fact that this actually comes with a piece that I think should have came with at least a large majority of these figures, and that is this little atomic beam part right here, which you can actually go ahead. There's actually a little piece inside of his mouth that it actually goes into, and you're able to make it so that he's actually like doing like the atomic breath. So there are times though where, especially if you don't have it on like a flat surface like this, that he isn't necessarily really able to support like the weight of it. So there would be times where he ends up like falling down like that. But as long as you keep it in like a decent position, you're able to get him in some pretty good poses. However, since he's not able to really like tilt his head very far up, he's basically just going to be just firing at the ground most of the time. But that's not necessarily that bad, because, you know, with the posability that it has, that it still has, you're able to do some pretty decent poses on it. And yeah, but also before I forget, the arms have basically the same joints that the other figure that I reviewed came in. The arm, they're able to go 360, and the elbows are supposed to be able to have that sort of joint, but it almost makes it seem like that's as far straight as it can go. So it's pretty much going to be tradition that he just has his arms constantly he has his elbows constantly bent like that. And also the fingers, they are on like a different piece from the rest of the hand, so you're able to make them so that he actually has his fist closed. Although his thumb piece right here isn't on like an individual piece. And that's about all of the articulation that it has. And one thing I actually want to go ahead and show off is the sort of comparison compared to the previous figure that I talked about, which was the 1994 version of the Heisei version of Godzilla. And as you can no doubt see, the Heisei Godzilla is ever so slightly taller than this version of Godzilla, which, you know, while that is technically true when looking at the actual movies, this height overall isn't actually accurate, because I feel not many people notice, but especially in the original Japanese version, this version of Godzilla is actually a lot shorter compared to other versions of Godzilla, especially ones from the Heisei series, because Heisei Godzilla is like one of the tallest versions of Godzilla that there are. So, you know, he would be like extremely tiny when compared to him, actually compared to him. But it is actually kind of cool that we're able to have two separate figures, so you can look at two like separate iterations of like the character. I think that's actually kind of cool. Unfortunately, one thing is that you're not the beam effect piece isn't compatible with any of the other figures that didn't already come with one to begin with. So you're not really able to like swap the different pieces with them. But that's something I honestly sort of expected. And there are other ones of this line of figures that can do exactly that. And also another figure that I actually went ahead and brought over is the Bandai Japan's version of the 1954 Godzilla. And as you can no doubt see, both the figures are very different from each other when you look at the design. You can actually, I'm not quite sure if you can notice in this light, but this version's gray color scheme is a lot more brighter compared to this one. And also, this one has a bit more of a creepy sort of look to it, mostly because of the way that the eyes are. Because if you look at, I'm not quite sure how well you can see it, but the eyes on that figure are more like separate from each other, like they're both looking in alternate directions, like he did in the movie. But you compare that, and then you compare it to the head of this figure, and as you can see, the eyes are look much more cross-eyed, and it gives it a bit more of a it just gives it more of an odd look to it. But I still think that the fact that this one has far more accuracy compared to the original Bandai figure, that I think that this is definitely well worth the purchase, and also because you can get this guy for much cheaper. Because like I said in the previous video, the original Bandai figures are getting much more rare nowadays, and they can go for a very high price. Meanwhile, you can get these figures rather easily, and they can go from as cheaply as probably like $30 to $40. But overall, I actually do really like this figure, and I am glad that I was able to make this video on it. And like I said before, I'm definitely going to be collecting more of these, and going to be doing more videos on them, and seeing how these sort of figures hold up, especially if they actually start making more versions of Godzilla from all the other movies, as well as other monsters other than Godzilla in this line. Because I'd really like to see what they do with some certain other kaiju that could do well as a for a display with Godzilla. So overall, that's all the time that I have for today, and I really hope that you all enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun talking about this figure, and until I see you all next time, I'm Ben Contreras, and bye.